Aubrey McClendon, was indicted into a major financial, I guess, swindling deal of the last few years. Him and Tom Ward, both co-owners of OKC, were indicted this week, and then a day afterwards, McLendon drove his car full speed into a wall, apparently suicide. His body was charred completely. But I want to bring this story back to the documentary Sonicsgate. If you haven't seen it, it's out there on YouTube. It's about the history of the Sonics organization and the Oklahoma City businessmen who brought the team to OKC about 10 years ago. McLendon was the number 2 guy in this situation. Tom Ward was there as well, and the number 1 was Clay Bennett. Aubrey and him were high school friends, been friends for a long time. So I want to focus mostly on Aubrey's, I guess, role in this whole affair, because the 2 hours barely covers the entire financial up and downs that took place over those years. So McLendon was quoted basically while this purchase was going on. Basically, these businessmen bought this team and said they were going to keep the team in Seattle. And then McLendon went to an Oklahoma City newspaper, I think it was in 2006 or 2007, and said, our intentions all along were to bring the team to Oklahoma City. David Stern got wind of that and fined him a historic $250,000. Justin, I'll let you take it from there. I mean, how did this feel to you when this went down?
I mean, it's obviously shocking. It's disappointing. You feel for his family. Obviously, the circumstances, whether or not it was a suicide, it does appear that way. That's still somebody's father. That's still somebody's husband. So that human aspect of it, it's always very troubling. It's in regards to the kind of Sonicsgate aspect of it. I think it's just proof that when it comes to owners, there's a lot of things kind of shady that they do behind the scenes. Some they do in the light that help them get into the position that they're in. And it's something sports fans don't like to focus on often, but typically those guys aren't always making their money in the most honest of ways. But when a tragedy like this happens, even if it was intentional on his behalf, all that stuff kind of falls to the side when you consider the human impact of it.
Phil, I mean, you're a what-if guy, and I know you've seen Sonicsgate yourself, and at the end there was a what-if posited. Basically, the city of Seattle and Washington State as a whole were basically in this legal proceeding with the businessmen from Oklahoma. They were coming to heads, and there was going to be a judge making a ruling. And basically a few hours, I think it was 4 hours before the judge was about to make the ruling, they made a settlement. And basically the Seattle community was paid off, and the team was moved to Oklahoma City. And so the what if in the situation was, what if they had won, or what if they had lost and they had appealed? It basically meant the team would have had to stay in Seattle for another year, which would have led into the financial crisis of 2008. And what's really important there is that McLendon basically lost 90% of everything he owned in the financial crisis that year, apparently up to $2 billion. And there's this theory that's been floating around that if they had stayed that one last year, the team would probably still be in Seattle today. What do you think about that?
Well, after watching it, I mean, I had many, many emotions. I remember just, being a Sonics fan and seeing them get Kevin Durant. I've always been a Kemp fan and everything. And I remember being very, very angry about the whole thing. And when I first heard of Aubrey's death, I remember a quote came into my mind. I was like, it seemed a little bit ironic how his life ended the same way that his group's attempt to keep the Sonics in Seattle did, deception and suicide. But in terms of keeping them around, I think, look, Seattle was very clear they didn't want any publicly funded stadiums. I think there is a larger play at hand here. Should cities have to fund this, or is the NBA just going for a cash grab? I mean, look, would he need the money? And Yes, of course. And part of the ownership group on the other side actually was now Clippers owner Steve Ballmer.
Hmm.
So obviously deep pockets there with Microsoft, who I think would have jumped at that chance. And I think if he would have done that, because the writing was on the table. We saw the leaked emails, we saw everything else. This group wanted to bring them in. You know, I'm very happy for Oklahoma. They have fantastic fans, tremendous success story there, but it does burn. I mean, because you have all the same, and it was a set of unfortunate circumstances, but I think they would have stayed, assuming the OKC group would have sold, and I don't necessarily know they would have, considering their goal was to go back. I think if you assume that because of the crash they're forced to sell and it becomes a poor investment, then yes, I think almost anyone else would have kept them there, and I think that, there would have been a bevy of people trying to do it. But I don't know. I'm a big what if person. You're right, but I think these guys who bought it, it was more than business for them. I think they're both. The whole group was big into bringing basketball to Oklahoma City, and I think when you're an owner, you're willing to take a loss financially sometimes, and to be the hero for Oklahoma, I think they would have stomached that for a year. So I don't know.
Justin, bringing it back to Seattle, I mean, 41 years of NBA history. They won a title, I think it was 78. You know, all these guys who went through there through the years, Hall of Famers, even Bill Russell coached there back in the day. How long do you think it'll be before they get a team again?
I think within the next 10 to 15 years, we'll see teams both in Seattle and Vancouver. I think those are the two markets the league really regrets getting out of to some extent. Obviously, Oklahoma City has been a success, but I think expansion's somewhat inevitable in the NBA. I think expansion not only in Canada but globally is something that they are looking at and something we'll see in the next 10 to 15 years. But you can't really expand to other markets until you reward and bring back that Seattle franchise. Came really close a couple of years ago. The Kings almost got relocated there. I think the perfect set of circumstances will come up eventually within the next 10 to 15 years.